Hey guys, this is Tiqqle, and this is my update to my 8.1 PvP guide. We're going to go through Azerite Traits, we're going to go through the talents, we're going to go through builds, stat priorities, everything, and you're going to get all the timestamps down below. Now remember guys, this will be on Icy Veins, on their Elemental Shaman PvP guide as well. Big shout out to Icy Veins. Great group of people. There's a lot of information you can get there. So let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with the Azerite Traits. The Azerite Traits I recommend are Lava Shock, Igneous Potential, Natural Harmony, or Synapse Shock. Now, here's the thing. I've gone round and round about Lava Shock. I actually think that this can be very good if you are focusing on critting and you're focusing on burst damage. I think that if you are doing that, and that's your focus point of your DPS is doing that burst window and maximizing that to Kingdom Come, I recommend going Lava Shock. Now, if you're not, if you want to be more consistent damage over time, I recommend leaning towards Igneous Potential and Natural Harmony. This is going to be more consistent damage, more consistent pressure. Now, you can mix match some of these together, like I'm running 2 Lava Shocks right now, 3 Igneous Potentials and a Natural Harmony-ish, and that's what I have for my Azerite Traits. We don't always get selection right now, but it's a decision that you have to make. If you go Lava Shock, you have to run more crit, because if you do not crit on Lava Shocking, it is not worth it. Igneous Potential, stacking that is great now because of the buff it just got recently of 150% damage. So mixing those two together is the optimal pair. The one thing I would say is that Natural Harmony is actually a very useful talent for many reasons. One is the crit that it gives you is going to help your crit of all your bursting. It's going to be great. Secondly, the haste is going to decrease the cast time, making your smooth play, your Maelstrom generation, everything go a little bit smoother and faster. So I recommend getting at least one of those in your set. Now, Synapse Shock is a backup that isn't that bad, increasing your intellect based on how many times you lightning bolt or chain lightning up to 5 times. It is pretty useful as a backup trait. So, pick that up if you have no other option. But I definitely recommend Igneous Potential kind of as the first thing to go for, and then Lava Shock next. Now, Lava Shock, again, is about that crit. If you don't crit with Sky Fury up, it's crap. So let's keep going, guys, into the middle traits. The middle traits, I recommend getting Unstable Flames, one of those, and 1 Overwhelming Power. I don't necessarily like stacking 3 of the same. I don't think that's quite worth it. You're going to miss out on some secondary stats, and you're going to be relying on the internal cooldown between those. So I definitely don't recommend that. What I recommend is if you're going for more crit burst build, try to get maybe 2 Unstable Flames and 1 Overwhelming Power. If you're going full casting build with only Igneous Potentials, and you're going Control of Lava build or something heavy casting like Icefury build, then I recommend going Overwhelming Power, getting 2 of those, and then 1 Unstable Flames. So I recommend that. This will give your secondary stats along with Natural Harmony a huge boost into the stratosphere. So I recommend that. Now, something interesting to note is that none of the traits I've talked about increase your versatility, which is something that is definitely on people's mind about LA Shamans and where they're at now and what about where their versatility should be. So that's something else to keep in mind. Just keep that in mind. And that's why a lot of people enchant and gem for that, because you can't get that through secondary means at all. Now, going to the inner ring, I definitely think the Pack Spirit nerf, they basically removed part of the nerf, so it is actually useful now. But the thing is, you don't want to go Pack Spirit unless you find yourself Ghost Wolfing enough. I would watch yourself, I would record some of your 3v3 games, and I would review how often are you in Ghost Wolf. Because if you're not Ghost Wolfing much, like I don't necessarily do that too much, it's not useful. Do something else. Go Resounding Protection. Go Impassive Visage. Because these are things that are either going to heal you or they're going to put Absorption Shields. And I really like Absorption Shields because they don't have to think about them. They can't be reduced by, they can be reduced by damage, but it's not healing affected by an MS. So it's just something else to think about. These are the ones I would get. I wouldn't really get other things, even though sometimes you definitely have to, like Gem Hide. You just have it on some pieces. You have to deal with it. But that's pretty much it for Azerite Traits. A little bit of a change since my last guide, but we're still okay. We have more builds now in this guide, so definitely wait until that section. Look in the description for timestamps, but let's move on to the next section. What I recommend for stat priorities is number 1, haste. I think haste provides smoothness of play. I think it makes it easier to cast. It reduces the time on pretty much all of your casts. It makes your dots tick faster, which is your flame shock, giving potentially more procs, more maelstrom, etc., etc. The second priority is up to you, I would say. 90% of people are going versatility stacking. They're doing that because you live more. It buffs your defense. It increases your damage passively for just, you know, overall damage output. And this is what most people are rocking because they're playing in double caster spec with an R Druid, a more dampening composition. That's currently the meta right now. But I recommend, if you want to go more burst and more damage, to go crit. And that's what I've been rocking when I've been stacking my lava shocks. I've been stacking a lot of crit on all of my gear. And that's what I'm going for, is I'm going for those kind of very, very spiky damage at the cost of some of my overall damage and even survivability, which is scary, but it's something I'm going for. But I would recommend, if you're just figuring out or just starting on LA, you're trying to get comfortable with it, or you're finding yourself dying a ton, stack versatility up the wazoo, get that shield strong, and that's what you got to do. Now, Mastery is last place, absolutely last, and that's just because it's not that useful right now. There's estimations that it's going to be more useful later on, but that's really it for that. Now, looking at the talents, let's just go through the talents. I'll kind of do a high level of each of them, and then if you want more information, ask questions in the comment, or ask for me to go through an in-depth video. I just want to go through kind of the highlight points so you make sure you understand these before I get into the builds. Number 1, Earthen Rage. Earthen Rage does about 5% overall of your damage, 5% increase of DPS. And it does damage from your flame shocks really ticking on things, or direct damage. The best part of this is that it's doing that damage while you're in CC. It's doing that damage while you're on the move. It's doing that damage while you're casting other things. So it's stacking that up. It is overall healable damage, but it is just additional pressure that you don't have to think about. You don't have to press another button. So that's why a lot of people go that. Especially if you're getting trained. If a flame shock procs this, it's an additional whatever K damage. You know, so it's going to give you another 6K damage on that target along with your flame shock ticking. It can start to build some passive pressure. Now, Echo of the Elements is becoming a fan favorite because of the igneous potential stacking. Stacking 3 of those, it is actually making your lava burst hit for a pretty good amount of damage. Now, taking this makes it so you can lava burst twice instead of filling with lightning bolt. Lightning bolt still not doing that much damage and doesn't generate as much maelstrom as a lava burst. So this is something that people are going against with when you're against a double caster. Like, let's say if I'm playing a Elemental Shaman and Boomkin, I'm going against a Shadow Priest Destro Warlock. I can run this, and I can be pretty confident that I'm going to be able to stand there and get those casts off. I'm going to have to lob some damage, and it's going to be overall pressure game. And we're going to have to, you know, dodge their offensives. But it's just something that if I think I'm going to be standing and casting, I'm not going to get pressured, I can go this instead. It will give me more damage. Now, what's the math there? I haven't quite tested it out. If you have, put it down in the comments below. I would really appreciate it. Now, next is Elemental Blast. Elemental Blast does not generate Maelstrom. If you get kicked, you get locked out of all schools, and it actually doesn't do that much damage. The only thing you would use this for is to get additional secondary stats, in which it provides a random one, and if it overloads, it gives 2. But it's just not worth it. I mean, for 370 stats is a lot, but it's just not really worth the RNG, especially if you get Mastery. So it's not really worth. Now, the next tier, jumping into it, is Aftershock. This is giving you a 25% chance to refund all your Maelstrom for using Earthshock or Earthquake. This is, you know, it's just RNG, and Earthshock is not necessarily your biggest burst condition, and to be honest, it's just, I mean, it's just not as great as it used to be. So it's just not quite worth it, and not quite worth it for the RNG. Now, the next 2, I'll just talk about them, and then I'll say why I select what I do. So Call of Thunder, it increases your maximum amount of Maelstrom by 30, taking it from 100 to 130. It also reduces the cost of Earthshock by 10, which is very important for bursting with certain builds. Right? And then Totem Mastery, I think it does overall more damage, but it drops 4 totems. One generates 1 Maelstrom every second. The other one causes Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning to have 5% increased chance to overload. The other one does Flame Shock, increased damage by 10%, which is actually a big deal because Flame Shock actually does a ton of damage over time as a dot. So it is important that this increases that by 10%. That might be increasing your, you know, that's going to be a lot. Let's just keep it at that. Then increases your haste by 2%. 2% is actually a pretty good chunk, just flat without any secondary stat requirements, right? So this is something to think about. Now, which one do you go when? I have different build. In the different builds, you'll see which one I select in what case. But to be honest, I like Call of the Thunder more than Totem Mastery, and there's a few reasons for that. I know Totem Mastery, probably statistically, will just do more damage, but there's some things about it. It is an active ability. You have to put the totems down. And what I find is that I either don't have them up all the time, or I place them down too often and I'm wasting global cooldowns, or I'm thinking about it too much and it's too much to think about. It's over, you know, too much. So that's one of the reasons why I don't usually go Totem Mastery. unless I know I'm going to get trained and I know I won't be able to generate Maelstrom, because it does help Maelstrom generation, which is almost the most important thing here, which is, you know, if I'm ghost wolfing around, it's still generating Maelstrom. It's getting me ready for burst. It's also, you know, increasing the overall damage, so that's good. But Call the Thunder, reducing the cost of Earthshock by 10 is actually very significant for my favorite build, which is the Surge of Power build, meaning that my burst rotation, which requires 2 Earthshocks, takes 20 less Maelstrom than if I did not go Call the Thunder. I would have to cast other stuff in between the bursting, which is garbage for, you know, doing the most amount of damage in the shortest amount of period of time. So that's why I really like Call the Thunder. It makes Earthshocking and using Surge of Power kind of, in a nutshell, very, very easy compared to if I went Totem Mastery. It would require 120 Maelstrom to do the burst, and you can't even store up 120 Maelstrom because it caps at 100 with Totem Mastery. So that's just diving into it a little bit. The next tier, I pretty much always go Earth Shield unless I'm against RMP, Rogue Mage Priest. There, I go Spirit Wolf so that I get 20% reduced damage on the opener, because they pretty much almost always go me as a Shaman, which gets countered by Assassination Rogue pretty well. Now, again, Earth Shield, I keep that on my bars. I refresh that all the time. That healing is really actually pretty useful, especially when you're healing yourself with Healing Surge, because Earth Shield, when you cast on yourself or other people, the healing to that target will be increased by 10% for any heals you do. And Ellie actually heals for a lot, so it is pretty useful. Static Charge is just not PvP friendly. Now the next one, this next tier, I never use Liquid Magma Totem, which drops the totem and it just kind of does an AoE on the ground. I might flirt with it in a rated battleground, but I won't do it in arena really ever. Next, I have the other two. So Storm Elemental. This I will not take Storm Elemental unless I have Primal Elementalist. And we'll get to that later when I talk about Primal Elementalist. But it's just not useful. When you go Storm Elemental, the problem is it takes away your Fire Elemental. Fire Elemental is so useful because it generates Maelstrom when it does damage. I'll highlight it down here. While the Greater Fire Elemental is active, Flameshock generates 3 Maelstrom when it deals damage over time. That's a ton of Maelstrom, and that's going to help you do bursts, it's going to help you do pressure, it's going to help you get ready and get the game going. I usually pop that in the very beginning of the matches to get the ball rolling pretty quickly. So I definitely recommend, you know, Storm Ellie is only good when you go Primal Ellie and you use the ability on the Storm Ellie. We'll get to that later in the builds. Now, Master of the Elements, this is actually what I always pretty much go, except for against the Primal games I play Primal Ellie in. Now, this is when you cast Lava Burst, increases the next damage of your nature, physical, or frost by 20%. I try to weave this in. Try to use Lava Bursts before I do Earthshocks, Lava Bursts before I do Lightning Bolts. If I can weave those things in just for passive damage increase, it's pretty useful. The next tier, I'm pretty much always going Nature's Guardian. The problem here is that Malediction Trinkets, and this will be a different video, but Malediction Trinkets, if they know you have this, if they maledict you early, and they know you're about to hit to 35% HP, they can negate this heal, which is very unfortunate, but it is the way it is. But you still basically run it because these are not really viable. Windrush maybe is against a team. I have never used it ever, though. Next, this tier is it depends on the build that you're going. I really like Surge of Power for the burst potential of it. It affects other abilities, and we'll walk through that in a little bit. But this is just an ability. This can help in so many different situations. Against double melee, if I Earthshock, Frostshock, it roots them for 6 seconds. Very useful. If I use Earthshock, Lightning Bolt, it does a ton of damage. If I Earthshock, Flameshock, it spreads the Flameshock. I mean, there's a lot of useful factors here that I definitely like a lot. So this is what I usually am running in most situations. Next is Primal Ellie. So Primal Ellie will increase the effectiveness of your Fire or Storm and Earth Ellie. The main purpose of this is that when you use your Earth Elemental like this, he has this ability. It's called Hardened Skin. The Primal Elemental hardens its own skin and the Shaman skin into pure granite, reducing all damage by 40% by 10 seconds. That's actually better than our Astral Shift protection. So it is definitely something you see a lot of Shamans taking right now, that it's just a melee Mongo out there, or it's double caster. It's just really scary to be against some teams like Walking Dead. So or RMP. So every RMP I go this trait. And usually when I do that, I go Storm Elemental as well, because I can use the Storm Elemental's abilities while I'm stunned. I can trigger that with my macros to just burst people, which is a ton of damage that it actually pumps out. Or I can use it as a second defensive cooldown and stagger mine, so I get more, high, oopsies with my healer. Now the other build here is the other trait here is Icefury. Icefury being it on itself doesn't do that much damage, but it generates 25 Maelstrom, and if it overloads, it generates 37, which is a ton. Now this makes your Frost Shocks do 200% more damage. This actually can do 20-ish K damage if it crits. Remember that, if it crits. Otherwise, it doesn't do that much. It does like 10K maybe, and it does generate Maelstrom, and you can use it on the move, so that is pretty useful. But I haven't really been a huge fan of this one. I just don't see the value compared to the double defensives or the super burst. This is just overall padding more damage right now. Now the last tier, unlimited power, is not really viable at the time. It's just not really worth it for the haste. You don't get that much uptime in one place. That's the problem there. Ascendance, if you get kicked on flame, lava burst, it's just not really worth it right now, unless maybe for rated battlegrounds for the control lava build. We'll get to that later. And that's that. Stormkeeper is a huge, awesome ability. It makes it so it takes a cast, and then after that cast, your lightning bolts will do 100. It says 150. I think it's 115% more, or 25. I forget exactly, more damage. So this buffed up lightning bolt will do a ton more damage, and it will, if comboed with Surge of Power, potentially do 3 overloads on the target if you use Earthshock and then you use Stormkeeper. We'll get into how to burst later. That's towards the end of the video. Make sure to look in the comments for this, the description for the timestamps. But it's definitely what everyone's running for every single arena ever. It's just so great. And you pretty much only use Lightning Bolt. With Stormkeeper, the Maelstrom generation from Chain Lightning is not a factor here. It's those single target bursts that you get from Stormkeeper that is pretty devastating. Now, going into the PvP talents, Elemental Attunement, this was a fan favorite in Legion. It's not really used anymore. You don't need to pool your Maelstrom quite like you used to. Control of Lava increases your Lava Burst damage passively by 25% and makes it so your Flame Shock, the procs that it gives you, increases your Lava Burst damage by another 25% damage, and that can stack up to 3 times. If it does, you are trucking meatballs, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the build itself. Now, Traveling Storms, this is giving a knockback, and you can target your allies with it, reducing the cooldown to 30 seconds, which is actually pretty useful in 2v2 in some compositions and some maps in rated battlegrounds like Eye of the Storm or Arathi Basin, or even Twin Peaks. Lightning Lasso, you're taking this pretty much every single time. It does an incredible amount of damage at 40% of the target's maximum health, or 5 seconds. It can be kicked, but you can move while you do it. But it cannot be dispelled on the target, which is a freaking, I mean, it's really strong. A lot of our damage and a lot of our arenaing is set up around this ability. A lot of compositions depend on this. Now, Spectral Recovery, while in Ghost Wolf, you heal 3% of your health every 2 seconds. This is useful for moving around a lot. It's good to kind of raise your base movement speed in Ghost Wolf from 100% movement speed to 110. It is good if you're going to be kiting a lot. It's good if you stack this with Pack Spirit and you're going to kite a ton, but I personally think that there's other things that you could be taking here. So I take this sometimes, but not all the time. More likely in Battlegrounds than anything else. Counter-Strike Totem is reversing damage back at the player. Not really that useful. You can take it for the kind of the lulls, because a lot of people will just target this and one throwing weapon break it. But it can be good to at least get their attention off for about a nanosecond. Purifying Waters, whenever you successfully purge a target, you're dispelled. You're healed for 3%. This one could actually be useful against Ardruids if you have an extra PvP slot here and you don't need Skyfury, you don't need some of these things. Like if you're against a Pal, who knows? If you're against some comp and you an Ardruid and you really are going to purge spam, this could be useful if you're going to get trained and you just are going to be purging. Swelling Waves makes it so your heals do 50% more damage 3 seconds later. Pretty useful. And I actually sometimes will run this if I know I'm going to be able to line of sight and heal a bunch, which is against like S-Priest Destro, and I'm playing against them and I know I can help my healer out a ton by throwing myself a little bit of heals. But remember, this is only when it's cast on yourself. Skyfury increases the crit damage you do and your party does on the target, or I mean just in general, by 20%, but only crits and only spells, so keep that in mind. It's great for Control of Lava build though, because every Lava Burst should be a crit if you have a Flame Shock on the target. Now, lastly is Grounding Totem. Grounding Totem is the best trait in the entire game, in my opinion. It is so useful. It can stop any magic cast, or it can stop any magic instant CC, like a Hunter Trap, Holy Paladin's Hammer of Justice, Cyclones, Spheres, Chaos Bolts, anything that casters are casting can stop. You pretty much are running this as your template. almost every single game is lightning lasso, grounding totem, Sky Fury being, you know, dropped during your burst. So that's kind of a breakdown. So guys, that was a kind of a long breakdown of all the information here, but I'm going to jump into the builds now. If you want more information about these, please let me know in the description. I appreciate you. Well, let's get into the next one. Now, I want to bring up something about how to be a caster. This is something I always bring up in all my guides. One, it's just, I think it helps, and especially if someone tells you and you haven't heard this before, I think it can make a huge difference. So when you're a caster, what you want to be doing is you want to be lining up instant cast damage with the end of a cast. So when you cast a lightning bolt, it takes 1.7 seconds. And at the end of that, your global cooldown's over and you can use an instant cast. So what I recommend is every player here, you go practice this on a dummy, go practice this on mobs. But what you need to be doing is every time you use a cast, you want to be, maybe not every time, but close to that, you want to be lining something up on the other end. Let's say I'm casting a lava burst and I want to do an earth shock right afterwards. I need to be casting a lava burst or casting that lightning bolt, and then at the end of it, I would need to be pressing that earth shock so that as soon as my lightning bolt hits, my instant cast hits as well. This is how you get a ton of spiking damage instead of just using a global, casting lightning bolt, casting lightning bolt, casting lightning bolt, casting lightning bolt, earth shock, you know, that's very paced damage. It's very healable damage. I recommend using this as a way to get your damage spiking and switching targets and able to spike damage really hard so that, you know, the entire time you're casting, no damage is going out. But then at the end, you're basically getting 2 abilities instead of 1, connecting to the target at once. So I recommend peeping that out. All right, guys, starting with the Surge of Power build, this is what I would recommend. I recommend going Earthen Rage so you don't have this extra lava burst. You just want that extra damage going out passively, potentially during your lasso hitting the target. You know, you're not even calling for that damage. It's just happening from the earth, Azeroth Earth. Call of Thunder, this is what I go for here because Surge of Power is all based around doing Earth Shocks and using abilities after that. So you want to have as many Earth Shocks up as you can. And the best way to do that is increase your Maelstrom pool. If you get it up to 130, you can have almost 3. And then reducing the cost of Earthshock, which is very, very significant, reducing that down to 50. Now that means that if I got my Maelstrom up to 100 or even 120, I could do 2 Earthshock combos with Surge of Power. And that's exactly what you do. What you do for bursting here is you're using Earthshock, and then, what you're doing is you're precasting Stormkeeper, you're Earth Shocking, and then you're Lightning Bolting, which by Surge of Power, Lightning Bolt your next cast will, after you Earth Shock, your next cast will cause a 1 to 3 elemental overloads, which is where that huge damage can come in, especially if they crit. Now, if they crit, it's a very big deal. And the part of the big deal about crit, why am I talking about crit so much? Elemental Shaman is the only class in the entire game that has this. Your damaging critical strikes deal 250 damage instead of the usual 200. That is increasing that damage by 50% more than any other class in the entire game. Now, in PvP, this goes down by 50% for all classes, meaning that normal people have 150% additional damage on a crit, but LA still has 200, which is a very big deal. And that's why I think crit is actually pretty important if you want to burst really hard. But anyway, I'm going Earth Shield because I always go Earth Shield. It's great defensive. Master of the Elements, it's part of my burst rotation for that big Earth Shock on the beginning. I will cast lava. What I'll do in my burst is I'll make sure I lava burst into my first Earth Shock into my Lightning Bolts from Stormkeeper. That is the 3 abilities you want to use in a row to get that huge damage out right away. This build generally is pretty much multi-purpose. I mean, it can go against anything. You're going to be going for those burst windows, those based on lasso, and then leaving lasso and doing a ton of burst damage. So what I usually do is I precast Stormkeeper, and then I lasso immediately, followed with an Earthshock Lightning Bolt, and that is a huge amount of damage. 40% from Lasso, and then you're getting huge damage out of your Stormkeeper coupled with Surging Power. And now Earthen Rage could be hitting him while you're doing that as well. So it's a huge burst window, especially if you crit with Sky Fury down, is doing massive amounts of damage. This is the build that I like the most. This is what I use pretty much every time unless I have to go towards the Primal Elementalist build. So for the SOP build, I recommend going Lava Shock because that's going to increase that 1 burst window damage. I would recommend stacking some crit, getting a Natural Harmony, which also stacks your crit, and then using at least 1 Igneous Potential because that does increase the proc chance of Lava Burst and does, is going to be increasing that damage of that. So that will also be useful, but focusing on the Lava Shocks primarily. All right, guys, I'm here to show you what the burst looks like with the Surge of Power build. Here is my setup. Everything you would expect. So how we're going to do this is we're going to precast Stormkeeper. We're going to drop Sky Fury. We're going to Lava Burst, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt. And that's going to do the most damage I can pretty much do, which is at 30k DPS here. And you can see the Earth Shock hit for, okay, that cannot be possibly right. But I got 2 crits, and that's partially because of the way my build's set up. But I did a ton of damage there with 54k. And then Overload doing a ton of, I mean, it hit 5 times, which is pretty great for having 2 lightning bolts hit. That's why this is so high damage. Obviously, this is a little inflated, I think, because of the dummy, I think. But I just want to say that that's pretty much the burst window. Now, you can see in the top left as well if you want to rewind it. But that's what you want to do for your burst windows. And then you would end with a lasso, which is going to do ticking damage of, I mean, like 13k, which is pretty crazy. Here's me using the burst in a game. I'm out of line, actually. Can't.
Probably. I'm close. Can you stop this? Or...
I'm on the ground.
Okay.
He stunned me. I'm in that spot you hate. But I might kill the druid. I'm gonna kill the druid. I'm gonna kill the druid. I'm gonna kill the druid.
Oh my god!
Alright, next up is the Icefury build. The Icefury build is much more about, you have a longer cast with Icefury. That's why I'm going Totem Mastery. I'm playing for a longer game. I'm looking to do overall more damage with less of the burst windows, more of the just overall constant pressure. So I'm going this set of abilities: Earthen Rage, Totem Mastery, Icefury, Stormkeeper, and I'm going these 3, which is pretty boilerplate in general, but it's pretty useful. Now, the Icefury ability, you want to use it, and then you want to be using those Frost Shocks, almost like Lightning Bolts, because they're generating 8 Maelstrom. Now, they can't overload like Lightning Bolts could, which means you could get total less Maelstrom from it, but it's probably doing way more damage than Lightning Bolts, especially if it crits. Now, for this, you're going to be casting more, so I recommend getting an Igneous Potential to be able to get those Lava Bursts to weave in and out of the skills, and you also need to have more haste, so I definitely recommend stacking some Overwhelming Powers, 2 of those, 1 or 2, not 3. I don't think 3 is worth it, and then having some Natural Harmonies. The Natural Harmonies will increase your crit and increase your haste, making this a little bit more smooth playstyle. Now, the burst for Icefury is a little bit different. You want to make sure your totems are down. You want to make sure your stacks are up, depending on your Azerite traits you're going. And then what you want to be doing is you want to be using this Icefury. You know, it's a little bit different, because what you want to do is, if you have Stormkeeper burst, what you need to do is you need to weave that between lava bursts, because when you lava burst, it gives you that 20% proc lightning bolt, and then you need to hope that you get another proc of a lava burst. And then you lightning bolt again, and then that's the maximum way to do your Stormkeeper burst here. And then otherwise, you need to be using your Icefury on cooldown, because that's going to be the best way to generate Maelstrom. And then you need to continue pumping. So here, you know, if I use Icefury, and then that doesn't do that much damage. You can see it here. Didn't hit for a lot, but it generated a ton of Maelstrom. That generated 37 Maelstrom. So I can be using a lot more Earth Shocks. And then here, yeah, this hit for 4k. And then I need to be using Earth Shocks. 11k, and if I can, I want to weave a lava burst between it. So now, you know, here the burst is a little bit less exciting, but you're really in it for the longer haul overall damage here. That's really what you want to be focusing on. So that's how this pretty much works, is weaving everything around lava bursts that are instant cast from your proc. So that's that. Now, for the Primal Elemental build, which I'm seeing a lot of people run, they're usually not running Storm Elemental. They're usually running Fire Elemental. It's going to generate a lot of Maelstrom for your burst. I actually like Storm Elemental in this case, because the case when I use this build, it's usually against Rogue Mage Priest. It's usually against, you know, DH DK or Arms Warrior DK. It's when I know I'm not going to be able to cast that much, and I want to be able to apply as much pressure as I can. That's why I'm going Totem Mastery and Earthen Rage, because these are 2 ways to passively generate Maelstrom and increase my Flame Shock damage from Totem Mastery, to passively do damage with Earthen Rage. And then I have Storm Ellie and Primal Elementalist, so what I'll do is when they start coming out and coming after me, I will make sure Storm Elemental is out and he's pumping. I'll make sure to use his active ability that does so much damage, especially when they're stacked. So it's applying a lot of pressure, especially against RMP. I'll do this as well, and it'll apply a ton of pressure. And that's what I want, even if I'm in a stun. Even if I'm, you know, running away or trying to line of sight or something like that, it's still applying a lot of pressure, so I think that's why the setup's great. The other one is, as we said, this Rock Elemental, the Earth Ellie, having this hardened skin. It's going to give me this huge buff, which is so useful against teams like RMP they're going having goes on me every 20 seconds. I need to be able to use this one cooldown and then use Astral Shift a second one, and having that available will make me win because I'm supposed to be a slippery snake as an LA boy. So I just definitely recommend going that. Now my PvP talents will probably be this, because you definitely want grounding if you're going such a defensive build, but this is how I play Primal Elementalist. And going this is usually, I would recommend, you can run one Igneous Potential, you can run the Unstable Flames for more crit, and you can run Lava Shock if you want to try to survive, build up a little bit of Maelstrom, and having a counter go with your Earth Shock and your Storm Keeper combos. So that's what I recommend for that. So lastly, I'll just show you what it looks like if I were to go the Storm Ellie build. Pretty much taking Storm Ellie, if RMP is starting and they're opening up and they just start opening up, I will drop my Storm Elemental, and then let's say I start to get stunned or I get locked down, I will use my pet macro, and it will use this ability. This ability does a ton of damage. And then let's say I get out of my stun, I'm able to lasso. I'm lassoing while he's doing damage. We're actually doing a lot of pressure at the same exact time. And if I look, that did 70k, and this is almost right. I mean, he does like 160k damage just in his duration, and he does last for a hot minute. So I don't necessarily use him for the reduced cast time on Lightning Bolt, but I use him for apply pressure while I'm down. Apply pressure while I'm in CC. Keep the pressure going. And it really does do a lot. The other thing is, again, that Earth Ellie, I have that set up so if I get stunned over here, he can auto stun and use his 4-second stun, or I can use my macro to use my defensive cooldown. So guys, let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about how I'm doing any of these builds, any of these abilities. You can see the skills in the top left as I'm pressing them, but I want to know from you guys. Let me know if you have any additional questions. Now, the Control of Lava build is kind of interesting. It's a little bit hard to manage the PvP traits of this. Taking Control of Lava, obviously. Skyfury is what you want to use here because everything you use out of Lava Burst, all the Control of Lava empowered Lava Bursts will crit as long as you have a Flame Shock on the target, meaning that this Skyfury will affect it 100% of the time. So that's how you want to usually set this up. You might need to drop Skyfury for grounding. You might have to do that, or drop Lasso for grounding if it's a team, or you're against an RBG against a team with a ton of Destro Warlocks. You want to have that grounding utility, but you don't want to lose this. So it's just something you're going to have to keep in mind. I definitely recommend using this build for any type of rated battleground that has a lot of team fighting, that has a lot of people in one place, because the key to this build is having 4 Flame Shocks up at all times. It's the most important thing about this build. You have to have that up because you have to get the stacking buffs. So the second thing that you need to be keeping in mind is you do not want to use Lava Burst ever unless you have 2 to 3 stacks, usually 3 stacks of the proc from Lava Burst. Now remember, every time you get a proc, it does reset the cooldown. So you could use one of the 2 stacks, but the thing is you want to have 2 stored Lava Burst stacks down here to cast once you have that 2 or 3 stacks up. So what you want to do is get that 2 to 3 stacks of the buff, and then you want to drop Skyfury and then just start laying out those Lava Bursts while maintaining those 4 Flame Shocks. Because as you get more procs, you will stay at 3 stacks and you will be able to keep Lava Burst machine gunning with that huge plus almost 100% damage additional on top of this. Now for this build, you want the Igneous Potential stacking. That is all about the meatballs. And then you also want to be running the Natural Harmony for as much haste as possible. You want to stack haste at the wazoo here because you're going to be getting those machine gun abilities out. Now, for this as well, you look at my talents, I'm going Totem Mastery for the haste. I'm going Totem Mastery for the Flame Shock damage because you need to be having that up everywhere. I'm going Echo of Elements because you need to have that 2 stack of Lava Burst to use. Once you get that 3 stack of the buff, the Lava Burst buff, you need to be able to dish those out back to back to back to back. Now, I do usually run Surge of Power here, so I do have a burst window with Stormkeeper, but you can go Ascendance. You can also go Primal Elementalist here to kind of have some more passive damage from Primal Elementalist for your Flame Ellie, and then Ascendance you can try to squeak in on a 3-minute cooldown a huge amount of Lava Burst damage. Now, this is risky. I definitely recommend going Stormkeeper, but if you're going for the huge burst in Battlegrounds, rated Battlegrounds, go Ascendance. I promise it will make your jaw drop at the amount of damage that you're going to do to them. So check it out. If you're doing arenas, I would recommend only doing this in the case that you're going against a double caster, a longer game, you're getting a caster with a pet like a Warlock. So I recommend trying it out in that sense, but I do not recommend Ascendance for arenas. I think that's too hard to use. If you get kicked, you get totally shut down. So I don't recommend that. All right, guys, in the control lava build, which is a little bit different. It takes a little bit to get used to. What you want to be doing is you want to be using these flame shocks on cooldown. You can be using other abilities, but you don't really want to use many lava bursts because you want to have those available for when the procs start rolling in. Like I said, 4 targets need to be dotted up. I don't even know if there's 4 targets here. There's only 3, which you'll see. Like I have a 2 stack of the buff now, control of lava, which is like, okay, it's gonna run out. I didn't get another proc, which is what happens with this build, which is sad, but it is what it is. And the other thing is, it doesn't consume it. It doesn't consume, when you lava burst, it doesn't consume those stacks. You have that long to get more. So now here's a 2 stack. I can use my lava bursts, doing pretty good damage. And now there's a 3 stack. When I see a 3 stack, I want to drop my Icefury. If I have Ascendance, I drop it, and then I start pumping. And I want to make sure I also keep Flame Shock still up there because I want to keep those procs coming. And unfortunately, it drops off, so I lost it. But basically, that's when you're going to get the highest damages, during those triple stacks. And that's when you want to really give it to him by dropping Icefury and unload at least those 2 lava bursts that you have. Now here, I feel like a Destro Warlock as a turret, but it is what it is, and it actually does an incredible amount of damage in rated battlegrounds. So I recommend giving this a try when next time you go in your RBGs. Here I have a triple stack. You know, you can see it. Oh, it reprocced again to triple, so I just keep spamming lava burst. Here I'm out of lava burst, so I have to use something else. All right, there's that. Got a triple stack again. I'm spamming those pretty much. Now I can use something else. And now it's back. Lava bursts are back. 2 procs again. So this is where it keeps living. It's like I'm playing craps right now, and I'm just rolling. There's another proc. So now here again, I'm just doing literally 100% of the damage that I normally would do without having this trait. So I'm just pumping. And this is pretty lucky right now, to be honest with you, because I'm just getting procs after procs. So I'm just able to spam lava burst into the targets. So that's how the control lava build works. Very fun. Definitely recommend stacking 3 igneous and getting into those RBGs or BGs and pumping some boys. Now, guys, that's going to be it for the end of the guide. This has been the updated guide for Tiqqle's Elemental Shaman PvP guide. I want to give a huge shout out to all of the supporters, all the members on YouTube that have joined up. I appreciate it. You press that join button. You showed the love. I appreciate you guys, and everybody else that comes to the streams every single day at 9 p.m. Eastern time, except for Saturdays, on Twitch and YouTube, guys. Huge shout out to all you guys. And if you guys haven't come to the stream yet, make sure you stop by. Let's do a battleground together. Let's chitty chat about this guide or different ideas that you have. And guys, we'll see you in the next stream or the next video. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to all my Patreons as well. Big shout out to you guys. I have my first one. Guys, we'll see you in the next one. See you later.